The call came in at 9 in the morning. I was still in the kitchen halfway through my first cup of coffee when the phone rang. It was Alden Pruitt from First National. His voice was calm but tight in the way bankers get when something has gone wrong and they don't want to say it outright. "Mr. Norris," he said, "your son Melvin came into the branch this morning. He had a woman with him. They presented a power of attorney with your signature on it and attempted to withdraw $180,000 from your savings account." I set the cup down. "I didn't sign any power of attorney," I said. "That's what I suspected. We put a hold on the transaction and called you immediately just like we agreed." I told him I'd be there by 10. Then I hung up, sat at the kitchen table for a minute, and looked out at the backyard. Loretta's rose bushes were just starting to bud. 3 years since she passed, and I still kept them going. Don't ask me why. Maybe because it's the one thing I knew how to do that she'd approve of. My name is Clifford Norris. I'm 67 years old. I worked 35 years as an actuary for an insurance firm, spent my career calculating risk, spotting patterns, figuring out where things could go wrong before they did. And apparently I hadn't seen the biggest risk sitting right across my own dinner table. Let me back up a few months. Melvin is my only son. He's 38, works in software development, lives about 40 minutes away. After Loretta died, he started coming around more often, which I appreciated. A house gets quiet fast when you've lived in it with someone for 34 years and then suddenly you haven't. Melvin showing up on weekends helped more than he probably knew. Sometime last fall, he started bringing a woman named Dana Whitfield. She was 35, put together, always dressed like she'd just come from somewhere important. She worked at a law office as a paralegal, handled estate paperwork, she said, property transfers, trusts, that kind of thing. At first, she seemed fine, polite, asked questions about the house, how long I'd lived here, what the neighborhood was like when I first moved in. I thought she was just making conversation. She had good manners and she listened when you talked, which not everybody does anymore. The first time I noticed something off was around November. Melvin and I were sitting in the living room after dinner and he brought up my finances out of nowhere. "Dad, have you thought about getting some help managing things? You know, now that you're on your own." I told him I was fine. Managing money is literally what I did for 35 years. I assessed risk for a living. "Dana sees a lot of cases where elderly people lose control of their finances," he said. "She just wants to make sure you're protected." There was that word, elderly. I didn't react, just nodded and asked if he wanted more coffee, but I filed it away. A few weeks later, they came by for dinner on a Sunday. Dana had brought a folder of papers, said she was recommending a home warranty service that covered appliances and plumbing. Said at my age, it was smart to have that kind of coverage, that she'd seen too many people get hit with big repair bills they weren't ready for. She pulled out a form, pointed to a line near the bottom and said, "Just sign here, Mr. Norris, and I'll get this submitted for you." I signed. She slid the paper back into the folder before I could look at the rest of it. I didn't think about it again until Alden called. Pauline Rafferty, my estate attorney, explained it to me later that morning at the bank. Dana had prepared a full power of attorney, giving herself and Melvin the right to manage all my financial accounts. She'd had me sign the authorization page only, separate from the rest of the document, while I thought I was signing a home warranty form. It was well done. The kind of thing most people would never catch. I sat in Alden's office and listened to Pauline walk through it. Then I looked at Alden and told him what I wanted to do. Close every account Melvin had shared access to, revoke all authorizations immediately. Set up verification on every transaction requiring my physical presence and a secondary confirmation code. And then I told him I wanted to set up one more account. A small one, I said. Enough to look real. Put my name on it, make it visible in the right places, and put a silent alert on it, so I know the second anyone tries to access it without me. Alden looked at me for a second. "You think they'll try again?" "I know they will," I said. "So let's be ready." Pauline documented everything that morning. The forged document, the inconsistencies in the formatting, the timeline. Then I drove home, made lunch, and called Melvin that afternoon like nothing had happened. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "You and Dana should come by Saturday. I'll make that chili you've always liked." He sounded relieved. "Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great." I hung up and sat in Loretta's chair for a while, the one by the window that looks out over the garden. I thought about what she would have said if she'd been here. Loretta was the kind of person who believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt right up until she didn't. And when she stopped, that was that. I wasn't there yet with Melvin, but I was getting there with Dana. The next morning I called Roscoe Banfield. Roscoe and I go back 40 years. We met early in our careers, stayed close through job changes, moves, the years when both of us were too busy to see each other more than a few times a year, and then the slower years after retirement when we had nothing but time. He spent his career in urban planning, retired at 62, and has mostly been traveling and playing chess since then. He knows people everywhere and he remembers everything he's ever heard about anyone. I told him what happened. All of it. The dinner, the paper, the bank call, the forged document. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Her name is Dana Whitfield, I said. Paralegal at a law firm, about 35 years old. Give me 48 hours, he said. While I waited, I focused on Saturday. Melvin and Dana showed up right on time. I had the chili going, cornbread in the oven, the house smelling the way it used to on winter weekends when Loretta was still here. I made a point of that. Familiar, warm, nothing out of place. Dana came in and complimented the living room, said she loved the fireplace, asked about the photograph on the mantelpiece. I told her it was Loretta, taken about 20 years ago on a trip to Oregon. Dana said she looked like a wonderful woman. I said she was. Then I went back to the kitchen to check on the cornbread. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Dana moving slowly around the living room while Melvin was in the bathroom. She wasn't touching anything, just looking. At the bookshelves, the side tables, the small filing cabinet I keep near the window, the kind of looking that isn't casual. I watched her for a moment and then made a little noise coming back into the room so she'd hear me. "Everything okay?" I asked. She turned and smiled. "Just admiring your home. It has so much character. 31 years of clutter," I said. "Sit down, dinner's almost ready." Over dinner, she steered the conversation toward the house 3 separate times. Once talking about property values in the neighborhood. Once asking if I'd thought about downsizing. Once mentioning a client she'd worked with who'd had trouble with estate taxes because he hadn't set things up properly ahead of time. Each time I gave a short answer and changed the subject. I talked about Roscoe, about the chess club at the library, about a book I was reading on the history of American infrastructure. Things she had no interest in. Things that pushed the conversation away from where she was trying to take it. Melvin was quieter than usual. He laughed at the right moments and ate 2 bowls of chili, but I could tell he wasn't fully at ease. Whether that was guilt or just tension, I couldn't say. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and wrote down everything I'd noticed. The moments she'd angled toward money or the house, the way she'd looked around the living room, the questions she'd asked. Not because I needed the notes. I have a good memory, I wrote it down, because putting things on paper makes the pattern clearer. It's something I did for 35 years, and it still works. The pattern with Dana was clear. She was methodical, patient. She wasn't rushing. She was building towards something in stages. The way someone does when they've done it before. Roscoe called back in less than 48 hours. We met at Sutton's on Oak Street. Virgil Sutton has owned the place for 20 years. It's small, maybe 8 tables, and on a Tuesday morning there was almost no one else in. Roscoe was already at the corner table when I walked in. He had a folder in front of him and he didn't bother with small talk. "Dana Whitfield," he said. 4 years ago she was working at a different firm estate and probate work, similar to what she does now. One of the firm's clients was a 74-year-old widower. No family nearby. Fixed income, owned his home outright, had about $60,000 in savings. I picked up my coffee. Over about 8 months, Roscoe continued, a series of transactions moved $60,000 out of his accounts through transfers she facilitated using paperwork he'd signed without fully understanding what he was signing. His daughter caught it when she came to visit and went through his bank statements. The family sued. Dana settled out of court. No admission of fault. The firm let her go quietly and she moved to her current position about 6 months later. I sat with that for a moment. How long after she started at the current firm did she meet Melvin? I asked. Roscoe checked his notes. She started there in March. Melvin came in as a client referral in September for some contract review work. They started dating about a month after that. So she'd had 6 months to look at files before she ever said hello to my son. She knew what I had before she knew his name, I said. That's what it looks like, Roscoe said. I thought about Melvin. Sitting across from me at dinner 3 days ago, quieter than usual, not fully comfortable. A 38-year-old man who thought he'd found someone real, who'd probably told Dana things about his father, about the house, about the family, the way you do when you're falling for someone and you want them to know where you come from. Does he know? I asked. I don't think so, Roscoe said. Everything I found points to her running this on her own. He's not part of the setup. He's part of the access. That was the part that settled into my chest and stayed there, not the $180,000, not the forged signature. It was knowing that my son had been used the same way I had, and he was still sitting in the middle of it without any idea. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table to Roscoe. Okay, I said. Here's what comes next. I met with Pauline Rafferty the next morning at her office downtown. Pauline has been my estate attorney for 12 years. She's direct, thorough, and she doesn't waste your time telling you things you don't need to know. I laid out everything. The forged document, the civil judgment Roscoe had found, the timeline of how Dana had positioned herself through Melvin to get access to my financial picture. Pauline listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 3 questions, took notes on 2 of the answers, and then sat back. The prior civil judgment establishes a pattern, she said. Same method. Elderly widower, living alone, paperwork signed under false pretenses. That's significant. Combined with the forged power of attorney we already have documented, we're in a strong position. I want to give her a chance to expose herself again, I said, on her own without me doing anything. I explained the honeypot account. Pauline thought about it for a moment and said it was worth doing, that if Dana attempted a second unauthorized access, it would add a documented second incident to the file. She made a call to Alden while I sat there, and the 3 of us worked out the details. The account would show a balance of $22,000, modest enough to look like an overlooked savings account, large enough to be worth going after. My name on it, visible in a way that Dana could plausibly have come across through paperwork she'd seen at the house. Alden's team put a silent alert on it. Any access attempt without my physical presence would be logged immediately with a timestamp IP address and access method. Then we waited. I kept up the routine with Melvin and Dana. They came by twice more over the following 3 weeks. I cooked both times. The conversations followed the same pattern as before. Dana would find a way to bring up the house or my finances, and I would steer us somewhere else. She was getting a little more direct about it each time, which told me she was on a timeline I didn't know about. The second visit, she asked if I'd ever thought about putting the house in a trust, said she could connect me with someone who specialized in that. I told her my attorney already handled that kind of thing, and that I was happy with the arrangement I had. She smiled and said, of course, that made sense. The third visit, she mentioned, almost as an aside, that she'd been helping Melvin get his financial documents in order. Said it was something she liked to do for people she cared about. Then she looked at me and said, I'd love to do the same for you, Mr. Norris, if you'd ever let me. I told her I'd think about it. I watched Melvin during that visit more than I watched Dana. He was more relaxed than he'd been at the first dinner, which I didn't take as a good sign. It meant he'd settled into the idea that things were fine, that his father and his fiancée were getting along. He wasn't watching for anything because he didn't think there was anything to watch for. That bothered me more than Dana's questions. The alert from Alden came on a Thursday afternoon, 18 days after we set up the account. I was in the backyard trimming back the rose bushes when my phone buzzed. I went inside and called him online access attempt on the honeypot account, he said, about 40 minutes ago. The login used account credentials that were set up separately from your main banking profile, which means whoever did this had the account number and created new access credentials from scratch. They got as far as the login confirmation screen before the secondary verification blocked them. IP address, I asked, longed. It traces to a location about 3 miles from here. We're not going to know exactly who was at that device without more steps, but the account number had to come from somewhere physical. Documents at your home are the most likely source. I thought about the filing cabinet in the living room. The one Dana had looked at the first Saturday she came for dinner. Add it to the file. I said, Pauline had the full incident report by end of day. Forged power of attorney, documented first attempt at the branch, civil judgment from 4 years ago, and now a second documented access attempt on a separate account. She said she had enough to file a civil fraud complaint, and that the prior judgment made a strong case for a pattern of predatory behavior. I want to talk to Melvin before anything gets filed, I said. Pauline nodded. She'd expected that. I called him that evening and asked him to come by the following Thursday, told him to come alone, that I wanted to talk to him about something and that it wasn't a big deal, just something I wanted to go over with him in person. He said okay. He sounded a little uncertain, the way you do when someone says it's not a big deal and something in their voice suggests it might be. I spent the days before that Thursday thinking about how to do it. I didn't want to walk him through the whole legal case like a presentation. I didn't want to yell or lecture or make him feel like he was on trial. He hadn't done anything wrong. He'd trusted someone he loved, and she had used that trust the same way she'd used his access to me. The clearest way to show him the truth was to let him read it himself. I put the folder together the night before, the civil judgment with the case summary on top. The timeline Roscoe had put together showing when Dana started at the firm, when Melvin came in as a client, when they started dating. The documented bank incidents. I kept it factual, no commentary, no underlining, no notes in the margins, just the facts in order. I set it on the kitchen table and went to bed. The alert from Alden came through on a Wednesday morning about 3 weeks after the Saturday dinner. I was in the backyard trimming back some of the dead growth around Loretta's roses when my phone buzzed. A text from Alden, activity on the secondary account. Call me. I went inside and called him from the kitchen. Someone attempted to access the honeypot account online at 11 to 47 this morning, he said. Used an account number and a routing number that match your records. The access attempt came from an IP address we've logged. The transaction was blocked automatically. We have a full timestamp and a documented trail. I asked him to send everything to Pauline. Already done, he said. I put the phone down and stood at the kitchen counter for a minute. Dana had gotten the account number from paperwork she'd seen at the house. Probably from the filing cabinet in the living room that she'd been eyeing at dinner. She'd been patient enough to wait 3 weeks before trying again, which told me she was careful. But careful people still make moves when they think they're safe, and she'd made hers. Pauline called an hour later. We have the forged power of attorney, the prior civil judgment, and now a documented second attempt, she said. That's a pattern. That's enough. Not yet, I said. One more thing first. I needed Melvin to see it himself. Not hear it from me, not read it in a legal filing. See it with his own eyes, in his own time, with no one else in the room. That was the only way any of this was going to hold together afterward. I called him that evening and asked him to come by Thursday. Just him. Told him I wanted help moving some boxes in the garage. It was a believable enough reason, and he didn't question it. He showed up at 7 in the evening. I had the folder on the kitchen table. The civil judgment from 4 years ago, the timeline Roscoe had put together, the bank documentation from the morning's access attempt, and the original forged power of attorney with Pauline's notes on the inconsistencies. I didn't say much when he came in, poured him a coffee, sat down across from him, and pushed the folder across the table. Read through that, I said. Take your time. He looked at me for a second, then opened the folder. I watched him read. He started at the top, the civil judgment, and I saw his face go still. He kept reading. The timeline, the bank records. He slowed down at the forged document and read it twice. I could see him working through it, cross-referencing what he was reading with things he already knew, things he'd been told, things he'd probably accepted, without thinking too hard about them. He read for about 10 minutes without saying a word. When he set the last page down, he didn't look at me right away. He looked at the table. His hands were flat on either side of the folder. The account number in here, he said. The one she tried to access this week. I saw that number on a statement on your filing cabinet when I came by to help with the gutters in October. I remember thinking I should remind you to put it somewhere less visible. He paused. I mentioned it to her that night. He said it quietly, not as an excuse. Just stating the fact, I know, I said. She asked me how much you had in savings, back in the fall. Said she was just trying to get a sense of what kind of planning you needed. He stopped, I told her. I didn't think anything of it. You weren't supposed to think anything of it, I said. That was the point. He looked up then. His face was hard to read. Not angry, not crying, just the look of someone working through something that keeps shifting the more they look at it. She started dating me because of you, he said. Not a question. She came to your firm because of clients like me, I said. Whether she targeted you specifically or you were convenient, I can't say. But she knew what she was looking for, and you were the way to get there. He sat with that. I let him, the first time he said after a while at the bank. I was there with her. I thought it was something you'd agreed to. She told me you'd signed off on a financial management arrangement. She showed me a document with your signature on it. He shook his head. I should have called you first. Yes, I said. You should have. He nodded slowly. Not defensive. Just agreeing. She had me believing you were struggling, he said. That you were forgetting things, getting confused. She'd mention little things, say she was worried about you living alone. I thought she was being thoughtful. He looked at his coffee cup. I thought she actually cared. I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything useful to say. We sat in the kitchen for another half hour. We didn't talk about Dana much after that. We talked about the gutters, about a problem with my hot water heater I'd been putting off, about a book he'd read recently that he thought I'd like normal things. The kind of conversation we used to have before all of this started. When he got up to leave, he stopped at the door. What happens to her now, he asked. Pauline files tomorrow, I said. Civil fraud complaint with the prior judgment and the documented second attempt. It's a solid case. He nodded. I'm not going to fight that. I know, I said. That's why I showed you first. He stood there for a second. I'm sorry, Dad. I know that too, I said. Get home safe. Pauline filed the complaint the next morning. Dana Whitfield was served 2 weeks later. Her attorney reached out to Pauline within 3 days of service. With the prior civil judgment already on record, a documented second attempt at account access, and a forged power of attorney with identifiable inconsistencies, the case against her was not complicated. Her attorney advised her to settle. She did. Melvin ended the engagement the same week she was served. He called me and told me in a short, direct way. No drama, no long explanation. Just the facts. I told him I was sorry it had come to that. He said he was two, but that it was the right call. I believed him. He started coming by more regularly after that, not every week, but often enough. Sometimes he helped in the yard, sometimes we watched a game. A few times we just sat at the kitchen table and talked the way we hadn't in years about his work, about things he remembered from when he was a kid, about Loretta. One afternoon in early spring, he was clearing out some dead growth around her rose bushes while I sat on the back steps with a cup of coffee. He'd gotten better at it over the past few months. He knew which canes to cut and which ones to leave alone. He looked up at one point and said she would have figured Dana out before the appetizers. I laughed. First real one in a while. Before she sat down, I said, he smiled and went back to the roses. There were days that winter when the house felt the same as it always had after Loretta died, quiet in a way that settles into you if you're not careful. But there were also more days when Roscoe came by, or when Melvin called just to talk, or when I had somewhere to be and a reason to be there. I started volunteering at the community center in January. Harriet Colburn runs the program, a practical woman who doesn't waste anyone's time. They needed someone who understood financial paperwork and could help older residents work through questions about accounts, benefits, estate basics. I went in twice a week. It turned out there was no shortage of people sitting across from complicated documents they didn't fully understand, trying to figure out who they could trust. I understood that feeling better than I ever had before. Winifred Bassett, who runs music lessons out of a studio on the east side of town, convinced me in February to come in for some sessions on an instrument I hadn't touched since my 30s. It took about a month before anything I played sounded like music rather than a complaint, but it was something to work at, and working at something turned out to be exactly what I needed. By spring, the calendar had filled in the way it hadn't since Loretta was alive, not loud or overscheduled, just full enough that the quiet, when it came, felt like rest instead of absence. Roscoe and I still meet at Sutton's on Tuesday mornings. Virgil always has the coffee ready before we sit down. Roscoe still wins at chess more than he should, given that I've been studying openings since January. He says studying openings is what people do when they don't want to admit they just play worse than their opponent. He's probably right. The roses came in strong that summer, better than the year before. I stood in the backyard one evening in June looking at them, coffee in hand, the light going gold over the fence line. I thought about the morning Alden called, about sitting in that kitchen chair with the phone in my hand, working out what had just happened and what needed to happen next. About Roscoe across the table at Sutton's with that folder. About Melvin reading the documents in silence, then staying to talk about gutters and hot water heaters like two people who still had things to say to each other. You don't get to choose what gets handed to you. You only get to choose what you do with it. I went back inside, rinsed the coffee cup, and called Melvin to see if he wanted to come by that weekend. He said yes. If you're a man my age living alone, I'm not telling you to distrust your family. I'm telling you this: the people who built their lives through decades of honest work have earned the right to protect what they have. Know your paperwork before you sign it. Set up verification on your accounts. Pay attention when someone starts asking more questions about your finances than your health. And if something feels off, trust that feeling. You spent a lifetime developing your judgment. Don't set it aside just because someone calls you elderly and says they're worried about you. Being careful is not the same as being paranoid. Protecting yourself is not the same as pushing people away. You work too hard and too long to hand any of it over to someone who never earned a day of it.